Hey everybody, it's Party Elite here with a review of Imperator Rome, the brand new grand strategy game from Paradox, set shortly after the fall of Alexander the Great's massive empire and during the rise of Rome and the conflicts of the Successor Kingdoms. You may have seen this game listed on my most anticipated games lists multiple times, and you may have seen my Let's Plays or perhaps early episodes of my ongoing beginner's guide, but now it's time for an in-depth review. I should mention, with full transparency in mind, that I did receive a review key from the developers, though I think this roller coaster of a review will make it quite clear that this makes no difference to my opinion. I should also note that, if you're interested in picking up the game and would like to support the channel and charity as you do, you might want to consider purchasing through the Humble Bundle link I'll include in the description down below and under the eye at the top right corner of the screen. I've been thoroughly excited for this game since it was first announced. A fascinating time period blended with the typically complex Paradox approach to things sounds like the perfect recipe. But is Imperator Rome a successor or a failure? God, that was terrible. Reviewing a game the scale of Imperator Rome is no small task, and that in itself is quite the compliment, in my opinion. Not only is the coverage of the game from a place and time perspective absolutely massive, but it brings with it a plethora of systems, each unique to subsections of this massive coverage area. But before we get too granular, let's look at the bigger picture. Imperator Rome, from more or less the get-go, feels like an attempt at a magnum opus. If you are at all familiar with older Paradox games, you will immediately see the influence of games like Victoria, Europa Universalis, and Crusader Kings. Not only are there easily comparable systems, terminology, and even user interfaces, one can quickly see where the influence of one game begins and ends, and it's easy to see systems that were built up from these other games versus those that are stripped down or modified systems versus those that are brand new. I'll minimize my comparisons to previous Paradox games for those of you who have never played them, but those of you that have will quite quickly see the similarities. Imperator Rome has you in charge of a nation, but rather than just being a faceless, ambition-deprived set of statistics, your leader is an actual person with actual traits and capabilities and actions they can take, like getting married or bribing people, whatever it might be. Your generals and admirals and governors are much the same. Rather than merely assigning stats and modifiers to your provinces and regions and armies, you're assigning people with ambitions, desires, loyalties, and options for interaction. Your relationship with these people matters, lest one stab you in the back or elsewhere 23 times, but while the relationship management is important, it doesn't consume most of your playtime. People require an occasional visit if they're starting to lose loyalty, or they're starting to get too corrupt, or if they need to be buttered up, and every once in a while an event will occur that requires your attention, affecting how various characters feel about you or how the nation perceives them and their grandeur, if you will. But apart from that, the characters are not the focal point. As the ruler of a nation, you also have people to take care of that aren't just the upper echelons of society. You're looking out for people's happiness and productivity, while keeping an eye out for issues as far as cultural or religious unity are concerned. You're helping people feel at home after conquest, and you're ensuring nobody decides to rise up in revolt, kicking off a civil war. But more specifically, you're looking at the needs and wants of your citizens, freemen, tribesmen, and slaves as individual strata of your society, each one with their own needs, each one with their own output, and each one with options for managing them or moving them around in a way that maximizes output and happiness throughout your nation while minimizing communal disagreements. But even this is not the focal point. You're scouting out trade goods that you need to bolster your recruitment capabilities or increase happiness or provide countless other benefits. You're looking for trade relations with foreign powers. You're looking out for potential allies, targets for future wars, members for your defensive league that you hope will stand against a large nearby threat. You seek new topics of research. You're praying to the gods. You're manipulating elections. You're setting laws. You're trying to get the tribes to settle down or uproot. You have to deal with barbarians, maybe with the troubles of centralization, perhaps the issues of loyalty among governors, generals, and admirals, or perhaps you need to convince your own people you're not a tyrant while simultaneously acting like one. You're assigning governors at a regional level while choosing policies at a provincial level, while recruiting armies at the city level to make conquests at a national level, all while convincing people you're not a warmonger, lest they turn on you. Crush barbarians, crush rebellions, crush revolts, move people around your nation, build buildings, raise armies. The number of layers and mechanics and focal points that Imperator Rome boasts makes it quite clear that you're not just the ruler of a nation in this game making the big decisions. You are the nation itself, taking control of nearly every aspect at a fairly granular level at times to ensure a prosperous future. And I think that's great. When I first sat down to play the game, I tried to take the approach of somebody who doesn't know what's going on at all, zero familiarity with Paradox games. It was difficult to get into that mindset because I've played them a fair bit. But with that mindset, the tutorial is alright. It's a little freeform, and it helps a new player get their bearings, and what I genuinely appreciate about the game is that it doesn't seem impossible to breach. The broad strokes of growing your nation, declaring war, gaining wealth, these are all very simple to understand, very clearly indicated, and Imperator Rome does a good job of creating simple feedback loops that let you learn from your mistakes and do better next time. But the game is also not easy to master by any means. Somebody completely unfamiliar with Paradox games will still, I think, have fun playing the game and going up against challenges as they come up, learning from mistakes so they can preemptively nip them in the bud in their next game. But players who want to really dig into the mechanics and systems and numbers will have an absolute field day as well. And for me, that's the perfect balance. I've mentioned it countless times in other reviews. I like a game that is easy to get into, but difficult to master. And Imperator Rome hits that nail right on the head. Now, because of how granular Imperator Rome lets you get, you can find yourself constantly fiddling and adjusting things to squeeze out just that little extra from your cities. Some things become second nature eventually, but this room for exploration and manipulation, multiplied by the hundreds of nations you can play as and the seemingly infinite number of cities on the map, means that there's a lot you can tinker with in a variety of ways. As with the best grand strategy games, I feel like I had options with all of these intertwining mechanics, that I could do things in a different way if I wanted, that I could chase different goals in different playthroughs as the same nation, let alone what I could do as different nations. No, I'm not talking about min-maxing, I'm talking about having fun and trying different things. This game lets you. With this mass variety of starting spots, each with their own nuances, settled tribes, migratory tribes, republics, monarchies, they all have their own unique aspects. For example, it really feels like the base game might last a century of playtime. But that's when reality kicks in, the reality of production budgets, timelines, and DLC policies. While there is a huge variety in the game and a plethora of things to do, it isn't long before you start to realize the sameness of certain sections. The overarching meta of certain regions, if you will. At a global scale, for example, all technologies and omens are the same. All that's different is what order you might pick them in depending on other things. For example, you might pick the tech that gives you extra tax income first as a tax-heavy nation, but you might pick the tech that cheapens the cost to fabricate claims first as a nation that needs to go to war right away. At the end of the day, though, the pool is pretty much the same. The same thing goes for omens. You might chase after different modifiers at different times with different factions, but the modifiers themselves remain the same. And there is a similar feel to unit recruitment as well, with everybody having access to the same units with the same modifiers. There are going to be certain consistent things that you'll chase after when you find yourself in certain situations. Now, yes, chariots, for example, are restricted by certain cultural identities and all, but overall, it starts to feel like a bit of a sea of sameness. Looking at regional or cultural subsections, we see a similar situation. Military traditions, like I just touched on, which in turn affect army compositions, for example chariots, can be very different between cultures, but within those cultures, they're the same. With a lack of missions, the objectives of a campaign are pretty much player-driven, and the decisions that are available are also the same across certain nations, depending on where you're starting. So already you can see how the game that feels so vast and immense starts to get cut down to size. Now, to be fair, it's still not a small game by any means, but before you think you're going to have 10 unique playthroughs on the British Isles, realize that it's more like 1 or 2 playthroughs with differing difficulties. With such a math-heavy game though, every little numerical change can make a difference, so again, to be fair, you could hypothetically play the same nation 10 times and get 10 completely different starts as the AI decides to do something else, or as your ruler has different starting stats, or your generals are weaker, or your offices are... You get my point. And even though some of the systems are similar globally, they are used to good effect to differentiate regions and people. For example, citizens, freemen, tribesmen, and slaves will always produce the same things no matter who you're playing as. So as a result, tribes will have more tribesmen and more mechanics to keep tribesmen happy unless they start to centralize, in which case they'll shift towards freemen and citizens. This means they start with easy access to manpower and taxes, but terrible access to commerce, income, and science. So the game does find good ways to manipulate common mechanics to have them feel special on many occasions. With all that said, I think it's already easy to see where the DLC might start to appear. And let me be clear, some Paradox DLC is downright amazing. Holy Fury for Crusader Kings 2 was insane, and all the big Stellaris DLC has been amazing. But we've also seen situations of very granular DLC, such as in Europa Universalis. So the DLC strategy Paradox goes with here is going to be interesting to see. I imagine each region is going to eventually get fleshed out, giving more unique options for decisions, if not a new mission system, and I can see incoming updates to the technology system, more depth being added to the governance and laws, and perhaps more depth being added to trade as well. That's not to say anything here already is bad, but I can already see where the opportunities for the next steps lie, and frankly, if the DLC policy is similar to what we've seen out of Stellaris and things like Holy Fury or Dharma, I'm all for it. Another issue that I think some might have with the game is the very click-to-solve-it system of problem solving. With the mana points or monarch power or whatever it's called in the form of military power, civic power, oratory power, and religious power, a lot of actions end up being simple transactions. While this is fine for some things, after all, abstractions are necessary at this scale, it certainly feels a little dull for others. Characters low on loyalty? Pay some oratory power or martial power to add to their loyalty. Time to get a new technology? Pay some civic power to get it. Time to change a provincial policy? Pay some oratory power and voila, it's done. Religious unity causing you trouble? Spam the convert button on relevant populations and get it sorted using religious power. I could go on and on with examples, and I really should point out that oratory power is far too important for far too many things to feel sensible. I don't know, I feel like I was always running out of oratory power and I always had countless piles of everything else. But like I was saying, so in some aspects, this whole approach is definitely welcome. Like not having to wait on dice rolls to fabricate claims, amazing. In other aspects, well, things start to just disappear into the background. I never have to, for example, really worry about the stability of my nation. If it drops, I just make a sacrifice of a few hundred religious power, and I'm good. This, to me, is the big one. I'd much rather see a system that has me interacting more deeply with events. When the nation is unstable, which in my mind is a huge problem, I shouldn't be able to simply click it away. Maybe send me down an event chain, or give me the option of trying different things with different chances of success. Maybe it all blows up in my face. The game already does this for certain things, and I think those are shining examples of how internal strife and decision-making should be approached for more things. And I say that out of love. I think the game does that really well, so in turn, it saddens me to see that there are major things that are reduced to just simple button clicks and payments of various monarch points. Sure, that brings in a degree of budgeting these points, taking care to save up or spend for the right things, but at the end of the day, it just feels a little shallow. The abstractions get a little too abstract at points as well. Having civil wars and rebellions and technological progress all just be bars that fill up weakens the narrative quite a bit. And while I'm okay with some degree of abstraction, again, I do feel like these are key elements that need it to be more than bars that fill up while giving you warnings every so often. It's a civil war. It's a revolution. These are big things. They should be more than simple UI interactions and button clicks. And one final issue. This one's actually really big, but as of now, I'm attributing it to pre-release build woes, and the fact that it happened in like 1 out of 100 games tells me it's either super rare or it was the perfect storm, and again, pre-release build. My Moria game had a game-breaking bug or bottleneck or something. On reloading my Iron Man save that was paused right after a war was won and peace was had, the game would lock up anytime I moved time forward. No matter the speed I did it at, changing graphics settings didn't help, verifying the game files, even reinstalling the whole game from scratch did nothing to help. And my Iron Man playthrough, just like that, was dead. Again, I'm hoping that's just either the perfect storm or something that'll get patched right away. It only happened once out of many games I played, so here's hoping that's not a big deal? Question mark? Now visually, the game looks fantastic overall. I do find the UI to be a bit in your face and large, but thankfully UI scaling is built in, and that's an easy problem to solve. It looks good, mind you, it's just big and clunky. Even on a 27-inch monitor playing at 1080, it was just big. But with it shrunk down a little bit, everything feels a lot nicer immediately. This is very subjective, of course, but I like the breathing room, and plus, it lets me admire the most gorgeous map in a Paradox game to date. Vibrant colors, great levels of detail, great legibility. The units look great, though sometimes they maybe should be different without needing DLC down the line, which is what I suspect will happen, and even the battle animations are nice to see, though granted, if you're expecting a battle like in other RTS games or like the Total War series, you're looking at the wrong game here. It really is a beautiful game, though. The water looks gorgeous, and panning around the map at certain locations makes me want to take a vacation. Very well done here. I'd like to point out, though, from a UX perspective, there are some issues here and there. For example, looking at trade goods. If you were to highlight salt, you'd have a hard time actually seeing where it exists versus where it doesn't. It fails the squint test, but that's definitely no deal breaker, just something I hope they'll patch soon. Accessibility and all that, it is important. I also think that the quality of the music should be highlighted. It is a gorgeous soundscape. The audio cues and the overall feel of the music is right on point. In many games, especially strategy games, I'll sometimes turn off music and play with my own music in the background. That is not how I feel about Imperator Rome, and if I'm completely honest, I will sometimes find myself randomly humming some of the tunes when I'm just on my way to work, walking or something. It's really nice music, definitely worth highlighting. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, you'll know that I don't like numerical scores. I find them to be quite arbitrary, and they lead to numerical comparisons between games that make no sense. What I value most is the enjoyment factor of a game. Is there fun to be had? And with Imperator Rome, I think the answer is a resounding yes. Newer players who are getting to grips with their first Paradox title will be able to turn to some of these safer options in terms of starting nations, while veterans of the developers' games will turn to others. The click-to-solve-it approach is a little unfortunate, and some of the abstractions are a little too abstract, if I'm completely honest, and we run the risk of a bad DLC policy, but I have faith that Paradox has learned what is received well and what is received poorly, so I'm cautiously optimistic. At least we know one thing: the game is definitely going to get post-release support. We also know that the game has been made from the ground up with mod support in mind, so expect all sorts of crazy mods, from overhauls to Horse Kings to Game of Thrones. It's going to be a good time. If you're looking for a game that rewards you for good decisions, just as it punishes you for bad ones, this is definitely one to look at. There's minimal hand-holding, the approach is very much that of a sandbox experience, the game lets you learn from your mistakes, and yes, there are a variety of approaches that you can take when trying to take over the world. I've never been the best tall player when it comes to these games, if I'm completely frank, but this is definitely the most fun I've had looking at the trade goods map in a long time, and this is the first time I've really paid attention to the systems behind my wealth and strength and made plans accordingly, and this is the first time in a Paradox game where I've actually cared for army management. Half the fun is in all of these little systems that come together very nicely to create this ornate picture that is Imperator Rome. I've literally thought my kingdom for a horse as I sent my tribes to war purely for the purpose of obtaining horses so I could recruit the right units to take over Britannia, something I'm still in the process of doing in my current Let's Play. But that's the kind of decision making that feels a bit deeper to me than I want more land. But it should be noted that this kind of decision making is entirely player driven. If you just want to paint the map willy-nilly, you can. But having a method to the madness is also an option, and yes, there's definitely room for you min-maxers out there as well. Because of the sheer scale and number of intertwining mechanics in Imperator Rome, you get from this game what you put in, and yes, I think it's different enough from EU4 and CK2 and Victoria and Stellaris to consider it a separate game before somebody suggests it feels like an expansion or something. It takes the best factors of all of these games and amplifies them. I hope this review gave you some insight on Imperator Rome. It was a bit of a roller coaster, I know, and it's also a very long review, but it's one of those games with so much going on that it's hard to just paint everything with broad brushstrokes. Just a reminder that if you'd like to pick this game up, I will have a Humble Bundle affiliate link down below and under the eye at the top right corner of the screen. Buying from there supports charity as well as the channel. Make sure you subscribe for more strategy gaming reviews, previews, let's plays, and more. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to each and every one of my channel members and patrons for supporting this channel on a monthly basis. And a massive thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching as well. Until next time, cheers.